All right, welcome back, everyone. We are on part 13. Where did the Book of Mormon come from? And so we keep on looking at what is the connection between Solomon Spaulding, who wrote Manuscript Found, and Sidney Rigdon. And as we can see, we had quite a bit of eyewitness testimony in the last. Yes, several of them were secondhand, but you can see that we have tipped the scales quite a bit, I think. And in 1816, you'll remember Spaulding had died. 1830, the Book of Mormon's published. So, we're looking more closely now at this 14-year period, right? We're looking at that gap of 14 years. So, what is the connection between Sidney Rigdon and the Book of Mormon, you might ask? So that's our next major piece of evidence, is that Rigdon had foreknowledge of the Book of Mormon based on eyewitnesses. Some will argue that Rigdon knew this because newspapers were publishing information about the forthcoming of the Book of Mormon. But let's examine that closer, and here's what we know. So it's very interesting. I got this from Donald Q. Cannon in the press, early newspaper reports on the initial publication of the Book of Mormon. So I invite you to actually read that paper. It's very interesting what he has to say. So Cannon says, as one would suppose, most news coverage originated in Palmyra or other neighboring cities. Although local newspapers paid a great deal of attention to the Book of Mormon, papers in other locations contained far fewer articles. In order to understand what these news articles discuss, let's first examine the New York newspapers. The earliest article about the Book of Mormon appeared on June 26, 1829, in the Wayne Centennial of Palmyra, New York. The editor of the Wayne Centennial was Egbert B. Grandin, who would later publish the Book of Mormon. This article covered the story of local gossip concerning the so-called Golden Bible, and even included sample title page from the forthcoming Book of Mormon. So you can see there, June 26, 1829. And then he goes on to say, later that summer, another Palmyra newspaper, the Palmyra Freeman, ran an article which included a brief history of the plates and described the forthcoming publication as the greatest piece of superstition that has ever come within our knowledge. The author of this article has been identified as J. Hadley, publisher of the Palmyra Freeman. In 1829, the Reflector, another Palmyra paper, had published some items concerning the Book of Mormon. Early in 1830, the Reflector began publishing excerpts from the yet unpublished book. So if we're looking at our timeline of these newspaper accounts, June 26, 1829, first known newspaper article, Wayne Centennial. And then there's other newspapers that come, right? We saw that. There's copies of Book of Mormon went on sale on March 26, 1830. So that's the earliest account that we know, friends. Now, let's think about another timeline here. So we got the Book of Mormon being published. Like I said, the Book of Mormon went on sale March 26, 1830. Now, I want you to think about Adamson Bentley. He was a relative of Sidney Rigdon's. He was the brother-in-law. And this is what he says in 1841. Adamson Bentley to Walter Scott. Dear Brother Scott, your favor of the 7th December is received. I returned from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on the 10th, and the answer to your acceptable letter has been deferred. I was much gratified to hear from you and family, but would be much more so to see you once more in the flesh and talk over our toils and anxieties in the cause of our blessed Redeemer. Your request that I should give you all the information I am in possession of respecting Mormonism. I know that Sidney Rigdon told me there was a book coming out, the manuscript of which had been found engraved on gold plates as much as 2 years before the Mormon book made its appearance in this country, or had been heard of by me. The same I communicated to Brother Alexander Campbell. Now, when we think about what Alexander Campbell, so Alexander Campbell wrote a response, and this is what I want to show you, 1844, 3 years later. Okay, So Alexander Campbell says in 1844, the conversion alluded to in Brother Bentley's letter of 1841 was in my presence as well as in his, and my recollection of it led me some 2 or 3 years ago to interrogate Brother Bentley touching his recollections of it, which accord with mine in every particular except the year in which it occurred, he placing it in the summer of 1827, I in the summer of 1826, Rigden at the same time observing that in the plates dug up in New York there was an account not only of the aborigines of this country, but also stated that the Christian religion had been preached in this country during the first century, just as we were preaching it in the Western Reserve. Now, it's very interesting. 1826 or 1827. Remember, the earliest newspaper account was in 1829, right? 1844. So we got him, and then we got Dr. Storm Rosa, 1841. So we want to provide what is said there. In the early part of the year, either May or June 1830, we might add, I was in company with Sidney Rigdon and rode with him on horseback a few miles. Our conversation was principally upon the subject of religion, as he was at that time a very popular preacher, the denomination calling themselves Disciples or Campbellites. He remarked to me that it was time for a new religion to spring up, that mankind were all rife and ready for it. I thought he alluded to the Campbellite doctrine. He said it would not be long before something would make its appearance. He also said that he thought of leaving for Pennsylvania and should be absent for some months. I asked him how long. He said it would depend upon circumstances. I began to think a little strange of his remarks, as he was a minister of the gospel. I left Ohio that fall, went to the state of New York to visit my friends who lived at Waterloo, not far from the mine of Golden Bibles. In November, I was informed that my old neighbor Partridge and the Reverend Sidney Rigden were in Waterloo, and they both had become the dupes of Joe Smith's necromancies. It then occurred to me that Rigdon's new religion had made its appearance, and when I became informed of the Spalding manuscript, I was confirmed in the opinion that Rigdon was at least accessory, if not the principal, in getting up this farce. Any information I can give shall be done cheerfully. Now, interesting enough, notice he says this is May or June of 1830, but Sidney Rigdon was not converted to the LDS Church until sometime in October, November 1830. So this is several months after that. Go a little bit further here. And then there's Darwin Atwater. Now, Darwin, let me show you, 1873. So Darwin Atwater says, the infant church at Mantua was left small and inexperienced, and I was the only one who had been accustomed to take an active public part. There were Brother Seth Sanford, Brother Seth Harmon, both very young in the Christian profession, with a number of excellent sisters. In our weak state, in the midst of so much opposition, we were poorly prepared to take care of the church. March 21st, 1830, I was ordained elder in my youth, and Brother Seth Harmon was ordained deacon, as in Bentley officiating. So this was March 21st, 1830. At this time, Oliver Snow, an old member of the Baptist Church, united with us. His talents, age, and experience ought to have been very useful to us, but they were more frequently exercised in finding fault with what we attempted to do than in assisting us. This only increased our embarrassment. Soon after this, the great Mormon defection came on us. Sidney Rigdon preached for us, and notwithstanding his extravagantly wild freaks, he was held in high repute by many for a few months before his professed conversion to Mormonism. It was noticed that his wild, extravagant propensities had been more marked. That he knew before the coming of the Book of Mormon is to me certain from what he said the first of his visits at my father's some years before. He gave a wonderful description of the mounds and of other antiquities found in some parts of America, and said that they must have been made by the aborigines. He said there was a book to be published containing an account of those things. He spoke of these in his eloquent, enthusiastic style as being a thing most extraordinary. Though a youth then, I took him to task for expending so much enthusiasm on such a subject instead of things of the gospel. In all my intercourse with him afterward, he never spoke of antiquities or the wonderful book that should give an account of them, till the Book of Mormon really was published. He must have thought I was not the man to reveal that to. Then moving on a little bit more, then we have Thomas Clapp, and this is secondhand testimony, 1879. So Thomas Clapp, elder, said Adamson Bentley told me that as he was one day riding with Sidney Rigden and conversing upon the Bible, Mr. Rigden told him that another book of equal authority with the Bible, as well authenticated and as ancient, which would give an account of the history of the Indian tribes on this continent, with many other things of great importance to the world, would soon be published. This was before Mormonism was ever heard of in Ohio, and when it appeared, the avidity with which Rigden received it convinced him that if Rigden was not the author of it, he was at least acquainted with the whole matter some time before it was published to the world. And then John Rudolph, 1884, and Zebulon Rudolph and Allen B. Green. And then in 1885, we have Samuel F. Whitney and also Reuben P. Harmon. And we have Stephen Hart, who gave secondhand testimony, and S.W. Hansen. So let's look at them. During the winter previous to the appearance of the Book of Mormon, Rigden was in the habit of spending weeks away from home, going no one knew whither. He often appeared preoccupied and would indulge in dreamy, visionary talks which puzzled those who listened. When the Book of Mormon appeared and Rigden joined in the advocacy of the new religion, the suspicion was at once aroused that he was one of the framers of the new doctrine. John Rudolph. For 2 years before the Book of Mormon appeared, Rigden's sermons were full of declarations and prophecies that the age of miracles would be restored and more complete revelations than those in the Bible would be given. Now that's it. I want to stop there just for a moment because that's what you find in the Book of Mormon. In Mormon, we believe chapter 8, and also in Moroni, which are definitely heavily edited by Rigden. He does mention the continuation of miracles. Let's keep reading. When the Book of Mormon appeared, all who heard him were satisfied that he referred to it. B. Green, in the annual meeting of the Mahoning Association held in Austintown in August 1830, about 2 months before Sidney Rigden's professed conversion to Mormonism, Rigden preached Saturday afternoon. He had much to say about a full and complete restoration of the ancient gospel. He spoke in his glowing style of what the disciples had accomplished, but contended that what he had not accomplished is complete restoration of apostolic Christianity. He contended such restoration must include community goods, holding all in common stock, and a restoration of the spiritual gifts of the apostolic age. Now, it's very interesting when you go to 4th Nephi and some others, it does talk about community of goods, of holding all things common. He promised that although we had not come up to the apostolic plan in full yet, as we were improving, God would soon give us a new and fuller revelation of his will. After the Book of Mormon had been read by many who heard Rigden on that occasion, they were perfectly satisfied that Rigden knew all about that book when he preached that discourse. Rigden's sermon was most thoroughly refuted by Brother Campbell, which very much offended Rigden. Reuben B. Harmon. My parents came to Ohio from Vermont in 1815. I resided in Kirtland when the Mormons first arrived. I was personally acquainted with Rigden. I have heard him several times say in his sermons that before long the Indian mounds and forts about there would all be explained. He caused a row of log houses to be built on Isaac Morley's farm, established a communistic society before Mormonism was heard of. I heard Rigden preach his first sermon at Kirtland Flats, and after he embraced Mormonism, he said that he had been preaching wrong doctrine and asked their forgiveness. Samuel F. Whitney. I heard Sidney Rigden preach in Squire Sawyer's orchard in 1827-1828. He said how desirable it would be to know who built the forts and mounds about the country. Soon it would all be revealed. He undoubtedly referred to the Book of Mormon, which was published in 1830. And then Stephen Hart, 1885. I came to Mentor, Ohio in 1826 and have since resided here. I was well acquainted with Sidney Rigden and other Mormon leaders. Isaac Morley and his brother-in-law, Titus Billings, and others through Rigden's influence established a communistic society on Morley's farm and claimed to have all things in common. I attended Rigden's preaching and heard him urge the church to put their property in the common fund and have all things common. I have heard Mrs. Mann and other members of Rigden's church say that weeks before he joined the Mormons, he took the Bible and slapped it down on the desk and said that in a short time it would be of no more account than an old almanac, and that there was to be a new Bible, a new revelation, which would entirely do away with this. It caused the church to distrust him, but few followed him into Mormonism. Then Hansen says, I resided in Kirtland all the time. The Mormons were there. They claimed to receive revelations from heaven on my husband's farm, which were with other farms adjoining. They bargained for and built upon them a large number of small wooden residences. When they went to Missouri, my husband regained possession of his farm with the buildings they had erected, including the one that Brigham Young had occupied. They not completing the payments according to contract. My father, R.E.A. Ward, a Methodist minister, attended the funeral of Elder Warner Goodell, pastor of the Baptist Church in Mentor, in August 1826. Sidney Rigden preached the sermon. Father said he was greatly surprised at many strange and mysterious expressions in the sermon, conveying ideas wholly unwarranted by the Bible. Rigden resided in Pittsburgh 3 years and claimed to spent the time studying the Bible. Soon after he left Pittsburgh, he preached doctrines that afterwards appeared in the Book of Mormon. Now, we want to mention the reputation of Zeb Rudolph. The article appearing of late in the columns of your paper as pioneering Reminiscences of Son CGC contains so many false and ridiculous statements concerning the Latter-day Saints as to require a reply, lest the unsuspecting and casual reader be deceived thereby. The way the tales and stories start and are enlarged upon is well illustrated in the statement told by our enemies and published over the country of what Z. Rudolph, father of Mrs. Garfield, had said about his knowledge of Sidney Rigdon in the Book of Mormon. On the 24th of July, 1885, I called upon Mr. Rudolph at his home in Mentor with the statement, and he at once said he had made no such statement. I know nothing of myself as Rigdon's whereabouts in 1827. All I got is second hand. I knew he was away from home in March 1828, longer than we expected. When we went away, he went to Mantua to hold a meeting and was to have been back in about a week, but did not come for a longer period of time. Found out that Walter Scott was to be at Warren, and he went down there to see and hear him. That was the time that Scott was stirring up such an excitement by his preaching. Well, we queried, what did you say to Clark, Braden, or anyone else that made them publish you as one of the witnesses to their assertion that Rigdon and Smith were acquainted before the publication of the Book of Mormon? Answer: I said that Deacon Blish told me he was a deacon in the Baptist church, that Rigdon left after Smith and Rigdon got acquainted, that he was apprehensive that Smith and Rigdon were colloquing together. If our friends had anything said or done by Joseph Smith that will justify his assertions, let him quote and give chapter and verse. We should be interested in evidence, but have nothing in common with gossip and slander, in the spirit of charity for all and malice toward none. We are ready at all times to seek the truth and pursue it, but in our investigation and strive for the right, we demand justice to the dead as well as the living. E.L. Kelly. So, what I'd like for you to do when we look at this, friends, is do your own study. See for yourself that these are reliable eyewitnesses. I mean, certainly is the case that Alexander Campbell, Adamson Bentley did know uh, Sidney Rigdon. So I would just ask you to look at them, but you can clearly see. Let's see if I don't remember if I show the map or not. Yeah, I mean, you see here, uh, you know, how did Rigdon know about a new religious book coming forth 1 or 2 years prior to its publication, if it had not been in newspapers until the latter part of 1829? I mean, think about it. We have as a case, there is a readable answer. He was involved in the production of it. And, you know, I mean, think about this. You got copies of the Book of Mormon going on sale March 26, 1830, and you have, newspaper accounts that one in 1829. But, I mean, 1 or 2 years prior to its publication. And we will strike down Zeb Rudolph But look at all these other ones that are mentioned. I think it's very important to see what they said. So it's very important that, once again, another piece of the puzzle is falling into place. And we see that it solidifies that Sidney Rigdon had a great deal to do with the production of the Book of Mormon. So I'd like for you to join us next time as we go even deeper into this. Thank you very much.